Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
I've always believed that a life isn't built on luck, it's built on choices. Small ones. The kind you make at 5 a.m., when the world is still dark, and your bed feels like an anchor. The choice to get up. The choice to solve a problem that isn't even yours yet. The choice to drive an extra hour to see a client in person. To shake their hand, because some things can't be conveyed through a screen. For 15 years, those choices were my religion. They were the bricks and mortar of Apex Industrial. I started with a dream that smelled of grease and hot metal, a small warehouse and a handful of second-hand machines. And day by day, choice by choice, it grew. Apex became a name, a benchmark in the industrial equipment sector. We employed hundreds of people, their families depending on the hum of our machinery. We weren't just making parts. We were building livelihoods. We were making a real impact. But more than the company, more than the polished floors, and the quarterly reports. I was proud of the foundation of my life, the people who held it up. Serena, my wife for 12 years. She was the grace note in my industrial symphony. The soft light that waited for me when I came home, covered in the dust and exhaustion of the day. She wasn't involved in the nuts and bolts of the business. She didn't need to be. Her presence at company celebrations, her easy charm at corporate events, her hand in mine on award trips, that was her role. She was the beautiful, serene face of our success. My peace, my home. And then there was Corbin. Corbin Vance, my friend since college. My brother in everything but blood. He was there when Apex was just a sketch on a napkin. He was there when I thought we'd go under. When I paced the warehouse floor at 3 a.m., convinced it was all over. I shared everything with him. My fears, my strategies, my most honest conversations. I made him CEO. I gave him the freedom to manage operations, to be the public-facing leader, while I remained the architect, the visionary behind the curtain. I trusted him with my life's work. I liked to think my world was stable, solid, engineered to perfection. I had built it all through effort, and I truly believed, that I was admired for it. I trusted Corbin like my own right hand. Serena was the point of stillness in a world that demanded too much. My house was well built, I thought. The foundation was deep. The walls were strong. I never thought to check for termites. That specific week, I had to travel. A supplier meeting in another state. 3 days of sterile conference rooms. Forced smiles over expensive dinners, and the kind of bone-deep weariness that sleep can't quite fix. But on the second day, a call changed my plans. The main supplier canceled. A family emergency. The meeting was postponed. My assistant offered to book me a spa day. Take advantage of it, Everett, she'd said. You deserve the rest. I could have slept in, ordered room service, and enjoyed the quiet. But all I wanted was home, my own bed, the familiar weight of our comforter, a quiet dinner with my wife. I wanted the one thing I thought was real, so I caught the first flight back. I wanted to surprise her. I even stopped at an airport kiosk and bought a bouquet of lilies, her favorite. The scent filled my car on the drive home, a sweet, cloying promise of a perfect evening, a perfect, quiet, uneventful night at home. That's all I wanted. I arrived just after 8. The evening was cool, the sky a deep, bruised purple. I let myself in quietly, the key turning in the lock with a familiar, soft click. The house was hushed. I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Surprise, that was the plan. I walked through the foyer. The bouquet of lilies held out in front of me like an offering. The living room was dimly lit, just one lamp casting a warm, golden glow across the space. And that's when I saw it. That's when my well-built house crumbled into dust. What I saw froze me. Not just my body, my blood, my breath, my very soul. On the living room sofa, the one we picked out together, the woman I loved and the man I trusted most were together. They weren't just talking. They weren't just sitting. They were close, too close for any plausible explanation. His hand was on her leg. Her head was tilted towards his. Their faces inches apart, caught in a moment of intimate conspiracy. The world stopped. The clock stopped ticking. My heart stopped beating. The bouquet of lilies slipped from my numb fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a soft, sickening thud. A sound that was too quiet for the world that had just shattered around me. Their heads snapped up. 2 pairs of eyes widened in a shared, synchronized moment of pure panic. Serena jumped to her feet, her hands fluttering at her throat. She started babbling. Words. Excuses. Something about Corbin being upset. about a problem at the office, something she was helping him with. The words were just noise, meaningless static. I couldn't process them. I couldn't hear anything but the roaring in my ears. Corbin, he didn't even try. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of pure, selfish despair. He stood up and moved towards the door, as if his physical exit could erase his presence, as if he could simply walk out of the scene and undo the betrayal. He wouldn't even look at me. Not once. I didn't shout. I didn't break anything. I didn't move. I just stood there, by the fallen flowers, and looked at the two of them, the two pillars of my life. Now just two strangers caught in a sordid, pathetic cliché. And I felt my chest tighten, a physical pressure, as if my ribs were being crushed from the inside out. I had lost more than a wife and a friend. In that one, silent, terrible moment, I had lost the illusion of safety, the belief that my foundation was sound. Without a word, I turned and walked upstairs. I heard Serena call my name, a desperate, thin sound, but I didn't stop. I went into our bedroom, my bedroom, now, and left my phone on the dresser. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking under my weight, and I stared at the floor, at the intricate patterns of the Persian rug we'd bought on our anniversary trip to Turkey. I stared for long minutes. Or maybe it was hours. Time had ceased to have meaning. It was there, in the crushing silence of that room, that the grief finally gave way to something else, something cold, something quiet, something calculating. My house had fallen, but I was the architect, and I knew exactly where every single load-bearing wall was. The days that followed were a blur, a colorless montage of papers, lawyers' offices that smelled of old books and quiet desperation, and dry sentences spoken in cold, clinical tones. I moved through it all like a ghost, an observer of my own demolition. Serena found her voice quickly. In the sterile environment of a mediator's office, her panicked babbling transformed into a narrative of calculated victimhood. Our relationship, she claimed, was already worn out. I was always working. I was emotionally distant. She deserved to be happy. The words were designed to wound, to justify, but they bounced off the new, hard shell I was forming around myself. Corbin didn't have the courage to say much of anything. He sent his lawyers. He avoided my calls. He hid behind the corporate shield I had given him. Cowardice. It was so much simpler than I ever imagined. I just listened. I nodded. I agreed. The law, my lawyer explained, was not on my side. Not in the way I'd hoped. Our state had a no-fault divorce law. It didn't matter who was to blame. Marital assets were to be divided. And since I had built Apex from nothing during our marriage, my shares, my life's work, were considered a marital asset. Serena was entitled to half of my stake in the company. The math was brutal. And they had already done it. With her newfound shares, combined with the considerable portion Corbin already owned as CEO, the pair could legally, cleanly, take control of the board. They could vote me out. They could take everything. It was a perfect, bloodless coup. My legal team urged me to fight, to drag it out, to file motions, to contest valuations, to make it ugly. We can bleed them for years, Everett, my lead counsel said, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a protracted battle. But I saw a different path. No, I said, my voice calm. Give them what they want. My lawyers looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but it was a madness with a method. I didn't fight. I didn't ask for a review or prolong the process. I agreed to the terms. Swiftly, but I had two conditions. My first was for my people. I required a legally binding clause that guaranteed the job security and benefits of all base-level employees for a minimum of 2 years. It was a way to preserve what really mattered, the livelihoods, the families, the true heart of the company. It was a gesture they couldn't refuse without looking like monsters. My second condition was for me, and it was buried in the fine print. A final, absolute clause. Serena, in accepting this generous and uncontested settlement, would forever waive any right to ask for any other benefits. No alimony, no future division of assets, no coming back for more, ever. This was it, a clean break. She accepted and signed with a discreet, triumphant smile. She thought she had won. Her lawyer, pleased with the easy victory, barely skimmed the final addendum. Corbin also seemed satisfied, from what I heard. The company was theirs. The throne was his. Undisputed. I was out. To everyone around us, to the industry, to our friends, to the employees who whispered in the hallways, I was the man who lost everything. The marriage, the friendship, The business I had spent a lifetime building. A tragic figure. A fool. But for those who know the nature of silence, for those who understand that the quietest moments are often the most dangerous, they knew something else was coming. Something neither Serena nor Corbin were prepared to face. Something that had been waiting, patiently, for 15 years. For weeks, I was a ghost. I didn't give interviews. I didn't confide in anyone. I didn't appear at the business events where my absence was a deafening roar. I didn't feel the need to explain, to defend, to rage. I just vanished. To the public, I seemed resigned, a defeated man licking his wounds in private. But behind that silence, there was no grief. There was calculation. There was strategy. And there was something few expected from me. Patience. I knew what I had built. Every screw, every process, every patent, every product leaving the Apex loading dock carried my signature in some way. I had designed the workflows. I had sketched the initial schematics on diner napkins. My DNA was woven into the very fabric of the company. But there was one detail, an almost invisible thread in that fabric, woven in long before Serena, long before the corner office and the international awards. A detail that would change the entire course of this story. Years before I even met her, when Apex was still in its infancy, a fragile dream operating on a shoestring budget, my first lawyer, a shrewd old man who had seen too many good men lose everything, gave me a piece of advice. "Son," he'd said, "separate the art from the frame." So I did. I created a separate holding company. A simple, unglamorous entity I called Everett Holdings. Its sole purpose, at the time, was to protect the most important assets of Apex. The art, the patents. Over the years, as Apex grew, every single manufacturing right, every new design, every proprietary technology was registered under the name of Everett Holdings, not Apex Industrial. I never disclosed this publicly. It was a quiet, internal, legal structuring. A firewall. To most of the world, including my own senior management, the patents belonged to Apex. It was a natural assumption. But legally, they belonged to another entity. And that entity was entirely, completely, and irrevocably under my control. The documents were filed. The contracts were registered. The intellectual property licenses were renewed each fiscal cycle. A quiet piece of paperwork handled by a specialized law firm that reported only to me. Nothing about it was recent. It wasn't a trick I pulled after the betrayal. It had all been planned far in advance, born from a simple instinct of precaution. And now, that detail would be my turning point. The day of the final meeting arrived. The day I would officially hand over my remaining shares and sign my complete disengagement from the company. The end of an era. I walked into the conference room I myself had designed. Serena's lawyers were there, smiling, their expensive briefcases ready. Corbin was at the head of the table, trying to project an aura of command, of superiority. He barely looked me in the eye. Serena sat beside him, cool and composed, the new queen of the empire. I played my part. I looked tired, defeated. I signed the last paper, my signature a quiet scratch on the page. I pushed the folder toward the mediator, and then I stayed silent for a few seconds, letting the weight of their victory settle in the room. Then, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a smaller, plain envelope. I placed it gently on the polished mahogany table. "Before we conclude," I said, my voice even and clear, breaking the celebratory silence, "I need to announce a decision from the board of Everett Holdings." One of Serena's lawyers frowned. "Everett? What? What is that?" I looked directly at him, then at Corbin, then, finally, at Serena, and for the first time in weeks, I let them see the ice in my eyes. "Everett Holdings," I announced firmly, "is officially revoking all licensing contracts of all patents, designs, and proprietary technologies currently in use by Apex Industrial." The air in the room turned to glass. The official notice has already been filed with the state. As of today, Apex Industrial has 30 days. 30 days to cease all production, sales, and distribution of all products based on these registered technologies. The room stopped. Serena's smile froze, a grotesque mask on her face. Corbin went pale. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly white. One lawyer began flipping through a stack of papers in desperation, his hands trembling. The other pulled out a laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard, trying to confirm the information. I remained seated, calm. "To be perfectly clear," I continued, letting each word land like a hammer blow, At the end of that 30-day period, Apex will no longer have the legal right to operate, not to produce, not to sell. Your company, without its patents, has no value. It is a car factory with no legal right to use wheels. I paused. And the revocation is definitive, irreversible. I explained how the massive loans they had taken out to finance my buyout were now secured against a worthless company. How the time it would take to even attempt to renegotiate, not that I would far exceed the payment deadlines. What they had inherited, what they had stolen, was an empty structure, a hollow shell without a product, without usage rights, and with crippling debts about to come due. One of the lawyers, sputtering, raised the possibility of contesting it in court. I was already prepared. You'll find, I said, standing up, that the documentation is ironclad. Everett Holdings was established years before my marriage to Serena. Its assets were never commingled. It is a separate, protected entity. There is no gap, no technical error. I looked at Corbin and Serena, the traders in their now worthless kingdom. There is only a silent, 15-year-old plan that has just dropped like a bomb in your lap. I picked up my coat. I left the envelope on the table, and without another word, I walked out of the room. I didn't rush. As I walked down the corridor of the headquarters I myself had designed, I saw employees looking at me with curiosity. Some smiled sympathetically. Others whispered. I just kept moving forward. With every step, I left behind the man I used to be. The company still carried the name Apex, but its soul, its spirit, had just walked out the door with me. And I, Everett Hayes, the man everyone judged to be defeated, had just checkmated the entire board with a single move no one ever saw coming. The news spread like wildfire, not through a press release, but through the frantic, panicked calls that started lighting up the phones at Apex Industrial. First came the banks. Their risk assessment departments, alerted by the public filing, wanted immediate clarification. What did revocation of patents mean for the company's valuation? For the loans they had just issued, secured by that very valuation? The polite inquiries quickly became urgent demands. Then came the minority shareholders, the ones who hadn't been part of the coup. They called, confused, then angry, demanding answers that Corbin was utterly incapable of giving. Within a week, the castle they had built on my ruin began to crumble. Suppliers, fearing they wouldn't be paid, suspended all deliveries. Buyers, hearing rumors of production shutdowns, canceled their orders. The entire sales team, with no legally authorized products to sell, was let go in a single, brutal afternoon. The ambition that had fueled their betrayal had built them a beautiful castle, but they had built it on sand, and the tide was coming in fast. Corbin started sleeping in the office, a man besieged. He spent his days and nights on the phone, calling lawyers, analysts, anyone who would listen. He even, in a moment of sheer desperation, called a former director he himself had fired the year before, begging for advice. He was drowning, and he was willing to grab onto anyone, even an enemy, to stay afloat. Serena, on the other hand, tried to manage the external bleeding. She dove into crisis meetings with the banks, trying to renegotiate deadlines, trying to project a confidence she no longer felt. In one meeting, when a major investor invoked a crisis clause and demanded the immediate return of their capital, she froze. She realized it wasn't just a problem of money anymore. It was a problem of time, and they were out of it. The market already knew. A digital business journal published an article titled, "The Apex Implosion. Did Everett Hayes leave, or was he pushed?" The piece suggested that my quiet exit might have been part of a much dirtier plan than it appeared. But the public reaction was not what Serena and Corbin expected. In the comment sections, people weren't just blaming them, they were connecting the dots. They pointed out Corbin's suspiciously rapid rise to absolute power. They remembered Serena's cold, triumphant smile at an international conference just days after our divorce was finalized. Then, the video appeared. It was from a woman named Clara, a machine operator, a single mother of two. She had been with Apex for years. Corbin had laid her off a few weeks before I left, part of his cost-cutting initiatives. With tears in her eyes, she told a simple story. She said that when I, Everett, had learned of her firing, I had found her. I'd made sure her severance was paid immediately, in person, and I had even called a contact at another company to recommend her for a new job. He lost his own company, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion, but he took the time to worry about me, about my kids. I'll never forget that. I have more gratitude for the man who was kicked out than for any of the executives still sitting in those fancy offices. The video went viral. It was no longer just a business story. It became a human story. A story of character. The public began to see who I truly was, and more importantly, who they were. The impact was catastrophic for Apex. Sponsors pulled their endorsements. An important client from the automotive sector publicly broke their supply contract. Another from the naval sector issued a statement saying they would only resume negotiations after deep revisions in the company's ethical structure. Derek tried to put out the fires, but each attempt was a failure. Serena, cornered and with her credit lines frozen, resorted to personal loans to cover their lavish domestic expenses. She tried to sell a property she'd bought during our marriage, only to discover that one of my lawyer's clauses in the divorce settlement had frozen the asset due to the ongoing litigation from the company's collapse. Check. Even their lawyers, after a brief, furious attempt to sue Everett Holdings, quickly realized they were wasting time and money. The legal protection I had set up 15 years ago was airtight. No gaps, no loopholes. Impeccable. They found themselves powerless, defeated by a detail they had ignored purely out of arrogance. They thought I was just an innocent engineer, too technical, too naive for the backstage games of power. They were wrong. I was strategic, I was discreet, and I had something the two of them had lost along the way: respect for my own principles. While they scrambled, their assets shrank day by day. The luxury cars were sold, the trips were canceled, and with each new headline about the imminent bankruptcy of Apex, my name resurfaced. Not as the cheated husband, not as the betrayed businessman, but as the man who acted with justice and knew how to wait for the right moment to prove that character is worth more than any contract. While the newspapers still feasted on the carcass of Apex Industrial, detailing the lawsuits Corbin faced and the public humiliation of Serena, I began to move, silently, purposefully. The machines of my old company, my machines, were being auctioned off. The vultures were circling, picking the bones of my former empire. The physical structure, once valued in the millions, was now being sold for pennies on the dollar. Many potential buyers stayed away, fearful of associating themselves with a ruined, toxic brand. I, on the contrary, attended each auction, discreetly. Through legal representatives and shell corporations, I avoided drawing any attention. Piece by piece, sector by sector, I bought it all back: the hydraulic presses, the CNC machines, the conveyor belt. In 2 months, using less than half of the money I had received in my own divorce settlement, I had recovered the heart of my old factory. I was building something new, this time with a new name: Hayes Manufacturing. The restructuring began without fanfare. No grand announcements, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies. I preferred to start with the essentials. The people. I reached out to my old colleagues, the loyal ones, the talented ones, many of whom had been fired by Corbin or had stepped away in disgust when he and Serena took over. Some were skeptical at first, wary, but it only took one conversation for the trust to return. Bill Dorsey, a man who had operated our hydraulic presses for more than 10 years, was the first to accept my invitation. He came to the half-empty warehouse, looked around at the silent machines, and just nodded. "Working with you was different, Everett," he said. "You listened. You remembered my kid's birthday. You were the kind of boss who would grab a blueprint and climb onto the production line if we were shorthanded." He was in. Day by day, more came. Some brought resume, others just brought hope. I talked to every single one of them. I made no grand promises. I was honest. The beginning would be tough. The factory needed to be rebuilt from the inside out. The contracts needed to be renegotiated from scratch. The market still carried the ghost of the Apex crisis. But still, they came back, one by one. Even some who had once believed in Corbin's promises, who out of misguided loyalty had distanced themselves from me during the takeover. I welcomed them back. No demands. No resentment. Just work. In parallel, I reorganized the patents. I had Everett Holdings transfer the usage licenses directly to my new company, eliminating any link to the past. The name Hayes Manufacturing began to appear at small industrial fairs, in modest but promising meetings. I didn't rush. I had a method, and with each completed step, I was rebuilding more than a factory. I was rebuilding the confidence of those who had been trampled by the greed of two traitors. One day, during a simple lunch of pizza and soda among the employees in the break room, something happened. I was talking to Leonard, a technical supervisor with 20 years of experience whom Corbin had fired, and who was now my new production manager. Suddenly, I was interrupted by a sound. A slow, rhythmic clapping. Without warning, Bill Dorsey started clapping on the table. Then Leonard joined in. Then a woman from logistics. Soon, the entire room was filled with a quiet, powerful applause. It wasn't loud or boisterous. It was a gesture of profound gratitude and respect, a simple, meaningful thank you for the return of something many of them thought they had lost forever. I just smiled, a lump forming in my throat. That moment wasn't about status, or profits, or position. It was about reconstruction. It was about looking into the eyes of people who had gone through the same cuts, the same uncertainties, and being able to say, wordlessly, "We're back. And we're together." Each employee hired back brought with them a story. The woman in logistics had gone through 2 unstable jobs and cried when she received her first regular paycheck in months. A forklift operator said he was about to move to another state before he got my call. A young technician, fresh out of college, who had never even met me during the Apex era, said he was proud to be there because he had grown up hearing his father talk about me as an example of leadership. When I saw the sectors gaining momentum, the new gray uniforms being delivered, and the first completed batch of products ready for shipment, bearing our new logo, I felt a sensation that was hard to describe. It wasn't euphoria. It wasn't the thrill of a personal trophy. It was a kind of inner silence. A deep, profound relief. I knew I wasn't the same man as before, and perhaps that was the greatest triumph of all. I had learned that real strength isn't found in the one who shouts the loudest, but in the one who remains firm while everything else falls apart, and still chooses to rise again with dignity. Hayes Manufacturing wasn't just a rebuilt company. It was proof that doing the right thing, even when it costs you everything, is still worth it. Hayes Manufacturing was growing strong. The old contracts, once held by Apex, started coming back to us. The clients didn't just want the products. They wanted the man, the team, the principles behind them. Our former employees were motivated, working with a renewed sense of purpose. We were reclaiming our place in the market, not with aggression, but with quiet, undeniable competence. I remained focused, working in silence, structuring each sector with care. When a group of foreign investors offered a multi-million-dollar proposal to buy a significant part of the company, I refused without a second thought. I sent back a polite, one-sentence reply. "Thank you for your interest, but what we are building here is personal, and some things don't have a price." Meanwhile, the echoes of the Apex collapse faded. Serena and Corbin sank. They lost the properties, the cars, the prestige, the credibility. Derek became the target of federal investigations for irregular financial movements during his brief, disastrous management. Serena tried to open a high-end consultancy firm, but her name was poison. Nobody wanted to do business with her. They were forgotten by everyone who once flattered them, surrounded now only by the consequences of their own actions. One afternoon, my receptionist brought me a letter. It was written by hand. The envelope was plain, with no return address. It was from Serena. I opened it. The handwriting was neat, but there were smudges on the page, like fallen tears. In the letter, she said she had spent the last few months reflecting on everything. On us. She admitted she had messed up, that she had made impulsive, greedy decisions and had deeply hurt someone who had only ever tried to do right by her. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, but she needed to apologize before she went away. She told me she was leaving the country, to try and rebuild her life somewhere else, far from anything that reminded her of what she had done, of what she had lost. I read each line calmly. I folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk. And then I continued my day as always. I didn't comment on it to anyone. For me, that letter was simply the final page of a book I had already finished long ago. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel relief or satisfaction. I just felt distance. As if the woman who wrote that letter, now repentant and broken, was just an old memory. A ghost with no more connection to the life I was building now. To the steady hum of the machines outside my window, to the laughter I could hear from the break room, to the quiet sense of purpose that now filled my days. My foundation was no longer built on the shifting sands of another person's loyalty. It was built on something stronger, something I had forged in the fire. It was built on character, on resilience, on the unwritten contract of respect between me and the people who chose to stand with me. And this time, the house would stand forever. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.